no joy for anybody until there is joy finally for us all. When large numbers of people share their joy in common, the happiness of each is greater because each adds fuel to the other's flame. Joy is prayer. Joy is strength. Joy is love. Joy is a net of love that draws people in. Joy is the simplest form of gratitude. The best way to show our gratitude to God and the people is to accept everything with joy. A joyful heart is the inevitable result of a heart burning with love. Never let anything so fill you with sorrow as to make you forget the joy of the Christ risen.
Good morning. Good to see all of you. Thank you for being here. Really appreciate you giving us your Sunday morning. I want to welcome those who are watching by live stream as well. Thank you for doing that. My name is Joe. I'm the lead pastor here, and we'd love to have you come and worship with us sometime here in person. We have worship services like this one led by choir and orchestra at 8 and 9:30 every Sunday. And across the hall right now, we have a modern service going as well, led by a band at 9:30 and 11. So come and join us sometime on Sunday morning. As we wrap up the summer, Valerie and I have been thinking about how this summer we have had this really rich, great, significant time with each of our 3 adult kids and their significant others. Now, I know that the pictures I've brought today will not compare to little twins that are in the NICU and a little precocious 3-year-old preschooler like Evan showed last Sunday, but I am just as proud of mine, and so I brought some pictures, all right? So here's Brianna and her guy, Ben, and those are their 2 dogs. That's Blue in the front, and Jack is the shy one, always hiding in the back, and they live in Austin. And this is Worth, our son, and his wife, Whitney. They live in Waco, and she's a NICU nurse, and he works with communities and schools. And then there's Glenna, my big baby girl, the young one, and that's Glenna and her guy, David. And Glenna is a school teacher in Arlington. And you know, we're really proud of these guys. We enjoy watching them take life by the tail and flourish. And they are discovering that life is not all fun and games like they thought it was when they were kids. And Paul is writing to a group of his spiritual offspring, his children in the Lord, in the letter to the Philippians. And so open up your copy of God's Word and look with me in Philippians chapter 2. Open up the church app, if you will. You'll find all the scriptures we're going to use this morning and look at there. Philippians chapter 2, we're going to start in verses 14 and 15 here in just a second. But what I want to share with you is this. In the same way that Valerie and I find great joy in our adult kids, even though they are sometimes struggling. To tell you the truth, not everything in our kids' lives is up and to the right, and it won't always be, even if it is right now for a time in their life. And you know what? They're not making all the same decisions that we would make. They're not even making all the same decisions how we would make them. But you know what? Those are their decisions to make anyway. And so we're just proud to watch and see that they're taking life on and flourishing, and they're not perfect, they're far from it. And Paul, when he was writing to these Philippians, they were actually his firstborn children in the Lord. They were the first group that he reached out to on a missionary journey and formed a group of believers together as what we would call today a church, a body of believers. And now he's in prison in Ephesus for preaching Jesus. And they have sent him this wonderful, great big love offering and supplies. And he's writing them a thank you note, but he's doing more than just saying thank you. He's talking about how much joy they bring him, how much he has pride in watching and hearing about all that they're doing. And he knows that it is challenging for them. So what he's doing is, he's doing for these spiritual offspring, kind of like what Valerie and I are doing for our kids. He is in their balcony crowd. He is cheering them on. He's saying to them, hey, I know it's difficult. It's challenging. However, you're going to be fine, and cheering them on. And I want to suggest to you this morning that those of us who are parents of adult children will do well if we will find a way to cheer them on, to get in their balcony crowd, even if they're not doing everything like we would. But maybe the application is not so much for our adult children today from the scriptures, but our application is for those who are either our spiritual children that we've led to the Lord or had influence on, or they are younger believers who are coming here to First Temple. You know, our church is being inundated by young families. We are this close to having to put a sign-up sheet in the preschool area for couples to take their turn to have babies. It's gotten out of control. I mean, we're like, no, y'all can't get pregnant yet. We'll call and let y'all know when it's your turn. It is out of control in preschool land. It's wonderful to see this happening. So many young families, young adults coming into our church. You and I need to be very careful to make sure that we are in their balcony crowd, that we are cheering for them. And they may not take on church like we want them to, or like we would, or they may not dress like we do, tucked in and everything. I did that just for y'all today, all right? They may not do that. They may not like the same songs that you like. But I'll tell you this, every time I'm in a worship service, I think this. Ooh, this is my favorite one. Until I go to the next worship service, and then I go, oh, no, this is my favorite one. So I just want you to know that we need to be in their balcony. We need to be cheering for them. Now, I will tell you that Paul does this. When he talks to them about how he knows it's difficult and says that to them, he doesn't let them off the hook. He still keeps the bar high. And so let's look in verses 14 and 15 of Philippians chapter 2. Do all things without complaining or arguments, so that you will prove yourselves to be blameless and innocent, children of God, above reproach, in the midst of a crooked and perverse generation, among whom you appear as lights in the world. I mean, you look in verse 15, a crooked and perverse generation. Basically what he's saying is, hey kids, it's a jungle out there. I know it. We've had to tell our kids before they got to adult land, hey, it's a jungle out there. It's going to be hard. But we're your biggest fans. You and I need to get around those who are younger believers and help them know that we are their biggest fans. Verse 14, even though it's difficult, even though it's challenging, do all things without complaining or arguments. What he's talking about is internal strife and conflict. What he's hearing about is as the pressure ramps up out there, Paul has been arrested, put in jail for preaching Jesus. He hears that his followers, his spiritual offspring in Philippi, are going through tremendous difficulty, opposition, even persecution, because they are followers of Jesus Christ as well. And he knows what's happening is as the pressure ramps up out there, they're beginning to turn in on each other, and there's internal conflict and arguing and bickering and strife going on within the body of believers. It's very natural for that to happen. But what Paul is saying is that cannot be. If you remember the message from last week that Evan shared with you, I shared across the hall in the modern venue from the latter part of chapter 1 and the first part of chapter 2 is there's this huge value on being one. Unified. Not uniform, but unified, like one. And right now in our culture, there's so much pressure being put on us to focus on what we have in distinction from each other, rather than what we have in common. So we're being polarized and divided. And now, there was a day when you and I could be friends with people who didn't agree with us on everything. They may have agreed with us on some things, but not everything, but we could still be friends. Now, we are being driven and pressured to associate only with those who agree with us about, not even most things, everything. It's got to be 10 out of 10 or we can't even associate with each other. Even more so, we're not supposed to associate with people who they may agree with us 10 out of 10 on everything, but they associate themselves with people who don't agree with us, so we can't associate with them. That's how it's happening in our culture right now. And Paul is saying, do None of that. Verse 14, do all things without complaining or arguments, internal strife. It's very, very important we do that. And here's why it's important. The world is watching. The world is watching. You and I need to understand that sometimes we think that the most important thing is that we agree on everything and all our theology and doctrine is all squared up together. The scriptures never teach that. Focus on what we have in common and be unified. We need to realize that what Paul is saying is that it's more important for us to be one with one another and getting along well than it is to make sure that all our T's are crossed and our I's are dotted just like we think they ought to be. Do you know that some people slant crossing their T's? That's got to be heresy. It's just got to be full heresy. Now, sometimes as parents, especially when the children are young, we have to get creative and figure out how we're going to solve a bickering going on in the back seat while we're trying to get somewhere on a journey, right? And one dad took it to heart, and here's how he fixed it. That's how he fixed it right there. He did that right there. Those guys don't even know the other one exists. No longer, he's looking at me. He looks like he's about to touch me. Remember those days? Oh my gosh. And you could say, don't make me pull the car over, and they would just test you to see if you'd really do it. Mine found out I would. Can you imagine having to take adult children and do that with them right there? How about we come in here some Sunday, and when you come in here, there's a little divider between each little individual chair just to make sure everybody's all going to get along. Is that too ouch? I ain't even gotten started yet. No, Paul is calling us to be one. No infighting, no arguing, no complaining, no bickering. Now, there is something in this text that might lend itself to that if we misunderstand it. Look in verses 12 and 13. There's a phrase in verse 12 at the end of it that I want you to see that if we don't understand it right, it may lend itself to us really focusing on ourselves and not on each other and getting along with each other. So then, my beloved, just as you have always obeyed, not as in my presence only, but now much more in my absence, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. That phrase, work out your own salvation, has been misunderstood and tripped up generations of believers. That phrase almost sounds like this. That you've been given salvation, but now you got to work it out. You got to make sure it sticks. You got to make sure and stay saved. Can I tell you something? If it's up to me to stay saved, I have already blown it and will continue to do so. You can't even amen on me blowing my salvation? You can't even do that? Amen. Yeah. Surely that is not what Paul is saying. That would contradict what he says over in Ephesians chapter 2, verses 8 and 9, where he says, it is by grace that we have been saved, not ourselves. It is not a result of works. It is the gift of God. So we couldn't be talking about working out our salvation or trying to stay saved or, anything that has to do with how we do or behave or work out. Another misunderstanding is in the part about your own salvation. Work out your own salvation. That has been confusing because it almost appears as if what Paul is saying is that you just need to focus on you. And we've always taught from the scriptures that each of us have to have an individual personal relationship with Jesus. Yes, you are not saved or redeemed because a family member is or because you inherited it somehow from a previous generation. You and I have to individually, personally come to Christ and receive salvation one-on-one. However, we are redeemed not just as individuals, but we are redeemed to a body of believers, and that matters. So many times we hear people say things like, well, me and Jesus, we've got this thing going. and you do your thing and I'll do mine, but me and Jesus, we're square. We got this all good. Can I tell you that that is not a biblical approach? We do have to have an individual relationship, but Paul says it matters that we are redeemed to a body. That's why he says the way he says it in verses 14 and 15. Look there with me again. Do all things without complaining or argument, so that you will prove yourselves to be blameless and innocent, children of God, above reproach in the midst of a crooked and perverse generation, among whom you appear as lights in the world. All of that is plural. I think if Paul were writing to us in Central Texas today, he would have said all of that with y'all. In fact, in Texas, y'all is just maybe you, but so plural is all y'all. So that's what Paul would say. All y'all together, collectively, are lights in this world. So what is it that Paul could be meaning about work out your salvation? Work out your own salvation. Well, there's a hint at it in verse 15, so that you will prove yourselves. That is the idea. The word for work out literally is the idea of acting out or enacting or demonstrating or performing according to a particular pattern. In other words, because you are saved, act like it is what Paul is saying. I don't know if you watch sporting events or not. I watch a lot of sporting events, and I'm always amazed at guys who are paid millions of dollars when they score a touchdown, act like they are shocked that they were able to accomplish it. They act like wild people when they do that. Or they hit a home run, they fling the bat as if they are totally shocked that they were able to pull that off. And coach is always saying something like, act like you've been there. I think that's what Paul is saying to Christians. Act like you've been there. Act like it's real. Act like you were saved because, oh, by the way, you are. That's what Paul is saying to this bunch. He goes in line with what he says in verse 13. For it is God who is at work in you both to desire and to work for his good pleasure. It connects with what he said over in chapter 1, verse 6. For I am confident of this very thing, that he who began a good work among you will complete it by the day of Jesus Christ. It's what he says in Ephesians chapter 2, verses 10. For we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we would walk in them. Act like you've been saved. Act like you've been there before. Now, some of you may be thinking, I thought this was a series on joy. And therefore, in this sermon supposed to be about joy, has Pastor forgotten and he just kind of took off on a tangent? What's he doing? Fair. Wrong, but fair. The joy in this passage comes towards the end of it. Let's look in verses 16 through 18. Holding firmly the word of life, so that on the day of Christ I can take pride, because I did not run nor labor in vain. But even if I am being poured out as a drink offering, it's kind of a weird phrase. I'm going to translate it for you. The word literally for all that big long phrase is one word. It's the Greek word, get it or not, spendo. Transliterated is what he's talking about. Even if I am spent upon the sacrifice and service of your faith, I'm used up. If I'm used up for that, if I'm spent, if I'm poured out for that, I rejoice and share my joy with you all. You too, I urge you, rejoice in the same way and share your joy with me. What Paul is talking about is that there's going to be a day in the future where they will be proven out and validated as true, genuine articles or children of God. That is going to be the day of Jesus Christ. What he's counting on to say, the work God has begun in you, he's going to complete it, he's going to perfect it, he's going to keep doing it until the day of Jesus Christ. And on that day of Jesus Christ, I'm going to stand there and I'm going to see you be ushered in with me, and it is going to bring me such joy and such pride. Now, there's a weightiness to what he's talking about. There's a weightiness in the phrase, even if I'm poured out, even if I'm spent, even if I'm used up for the purpose of you and your faith, that brings me great joy. All of us as parents know what it is to sacrifice and do without so that our children flourish. And it gives us nothing but joy. We wouldn't have it any other way. But there's a weightiness to this. There's a weight on us. I wonder if it's what Paul was talking about when he said up in verse 12, with fear and trembling. This idea of a weight on us. There's a weight on him that he's thinking about how they're doing right now. If they get too far down the road of internal conflict and bickering and arguing with one another, if all of that is going to be spoiled and ruined. There's a weightiness because Paul understands that there is a responsibility on him for the next generation of believers that he is influencing. And I will tell you, as your pastor, I understand that weightiness, that weight. I've said it for decades. Until you're the lead pastor, you may or may not understand this, but I will tell you this. I believe it with all my heart. There's going to come a day when I will stand before God. It will not affect my salvation. My salvation is secure. But I will stand before God and I will give an account for what happened and things happened and what went on here at First Temple while I was the pastor. And I will tell you that I'm sober enough to tell you that no one will give a greater account for what happens at First Baptist Church Temple while I'm the pastor than myself. I said that in previous church when I was leading, and a guy came up afterwards and argued with me and said, "Pastor, you take yourself way too seriously." And I said, "Oh, well, that is possible. I'm a flawed, sinful human being that makes mistakes every day." So I'm not talking about taking myself too seriously. What I'm talking about is taking my pastoral responsibility before God that seriously. And he said, "Oh, well, then you're taking that too seriously." And I said, "Well, I'm going to think about that because so far in my life, I can't even figure out how that would even be possible." And can I tell you something? I've thought about it. I don't think it's possible to take that too seriously. I just don't. What happened among the believers of Philippi mattered to Paul. He felt responsible. And I feel responsible for what happens at First Temple. So you can rest assured I take that very, very seriously. I'm paying close attention. I've even thought about little dividers for the seats between them. I mean, I've thought about that. Kind of don't make me pull this whole car over. But can I tell you something? You bring me great joy, and I'm very, very proud of what God is doing here at First Temple. Not because of me. I just feel a sense of pride about what I see God doing among you. I see him working, and you're not perfect. And you're not even making all the decisions that I think you ought to make like they ought to be made. But they are your decisions to make. And I'm in your balcony crowd, and I'm cheering you on like Paul was cheering them on. And I will tell you, you make me so proud. This last spring, we made a rather different kind of decision together as a church. We decided to take 10% of the proceeds from the sale of our land next door and behind us and actually tithe off of that and give that to other ministries. I'm still getting emails and phone calls from people in the community that are telling me, "We are shocked by y'all doing that. That is really different. Churches don't ever do that." And I'm going, churches ask their people to tithe all the time. Why don't churches tithe sometimes? It was amazing. And I'll tell you, it's not just the decision that we made, but how we made it, because we weren't even 100% in how we should make it. Not everybody was in agreement that we should do that or even that amount. But if you were here that night when we made that decision, you will understand what I'm saying is it was one thing for us to make the decision that we made. It was another thing altogether for how it was that we made the decision. I mean, it was almost like we weren't even at a Baptist business meeting, but that's what we were at. A total stranger was visiting that night, and they let us know, now that's how church ought to be right there. It was so good to see that even those who maybe not agreed with others in the room, no one got upset, no one lost their temper. People stayed afterwards for like 25, 30 minutes. I thought, we're going to have to turn the lights out on these people? I mean, it was amazing. What a wonderful thing to see. I've watched it other times. I remember last spring break, there were a group of women on mission ladies who decided to go hang out with the college students during their in-town mission trip down at Unincluded Club. Just hang out with them, encourage them, support them. A couple of weeks ago, we had the brand new freshmen of college showing up, hundreds of students here. I watched in the Commons, I watched senior adults from this room go up, not wait for the college students to come greet them. They walked right up and introduced themselves and asked if they could help them find anything. I watched you. That was awesome. It inspired me to even think, could I even encourage you to go a little farther? Could I risk suggesting you do something like, Gary, you just keep seated, all right, buddy? Okay. Sometime between now and Christmas, you pick a Sunday and you actually get lost in the Commons and end up in the wrong worship room at 9:30. And go to the modern venue just to hang out with the younger generation of believers. You know what? They don't like the same music you do. They don't dress the same way you do. They don't even like the same preachers you do. They don't like the same translation of scriptures you do. But so what? They are coming to church. Let's get in their balcony crowd. Let's cheer them on. Even if it means we go and hang out with them every once in a while over there. And maybe invite them to come hang out with us over here. What would that be like? Oh, by the way, if you go over there, I'm going to make one suggestion to you. You take your earplugs with you. They like it loud. Most of the time when I'm in that room, my shirt is moving. I mean, that's how loud it is. You take your earplugs. And there's probably going to be some point during the service where you're going to try to reach for a seat belt or wonder if an airbag is going to deploy or something. What if you did that? What if you got in their balcony crowd and cheered them on like that? I think it would make a huge difference. I don't know where you are with your adult children. I realize that topic may be rather challenging and difficult. And there may be a day in our future where that topic is a lot more challenging and difficult as it is right now. Right now, everything is great in our relationship with our adult kids, even though they aren't doing life exactly like we would suggest that they do it. But we've got a good enough relationship to where I texted and asked for and received in response very quickly 3 pictures to use on Sunday morning and full permission to talk about them behind their back. That's something. They know that we are their biggest fans. The Philippians knew that Paul was their biggest fan. What would happen at First Temple if the young generation of believers next door saw, experienced, and became convinced that you are their biggest fans? What would happen? Let's pray. As we pray, hear the word of the Lord. So then, my beloved, just as you have always obeyed, and not as in my presence only, but now much more in my absence, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling, for it is God who is at work in you, both to desire and to work for his good pleasure. Do all things without complaining or arguing, so that you will prove yourselves to be blameless and innocent children of God, above reproach in the midst of a crooked and perverse generation, among whom you appear as lights in the world, holding firmly the word of life so that on the day of Christ I can take pride because I did not run in vain or labor in vain, but even if I am being spent upon the sacrifice and service of your faith, I rejoice and share my joy with you all. You too, I urge you, rejoice in the same way and share your joy with me. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.